Okay, so there's been a whole bunch of Cleveland Browns coaching changes. Obviously, we've been off for a minute. Bree was conquering her work, and I had a sort of unexpected trip to the Senior Bowl, which was great. I got the opportunity to combine my regular job with my coaching job. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, Bree, obviously, we've seen a whole lot of change. Sort of where are you at with the amount of stuff that's sort of gone on this week and a half or so?
I mean, obviously, we knew this was coming with the offensive coordinator need. Because I think when did we last record, Pete? I don't even remember.
Right after the last, it was literally right after the game, the Browns, the last playoff game.
So we didn't know yet about the coaching changes, right?
No, that's
Okay.
all. That's all. Every coaching change has happened since we've recorded.
Okay. I'm losing track of time because now this feels like forever ago since the Browns last played their playoff game. Yeah, so obviously the news coming out of that entire week was just offensive staff changes. And then with Brian Callahan getting the coaching job in Tennessee, there was a lot of speculation that Bill would follow him there. And so everyone, for the last couple of weeks have been, I don't want to say panicking, based on all of these changes, but for me specifically, number one, I fully expected a father to go coach with his son in the NFL given the chance. I can't be mad about that. Like, that is just an incredible opportunity that you should jump at, because how often does that actually get to happen? So really happy for him. I'm sad for the Browns and the Alex Van Pelt being let go, fired, whatever you want to call it. I'm really open to having a new offensive coordinator. I know the man is now Ken Dorsey, right? And I don't know, Pete. Like, I don't know if that was their number one. I don't know if you have any inside information as to like who their number one candidate was for offensive coordinator specifically, but I am someone who is very open to change in all aspects of life, in my job, in my personal life, and certainly for the Cleveland Browns. I think at this point in Kevin Stefanski's career and tenure with the Browns, I actually think it probably needs to happen.
Okay, so there's a lot. First,
a lot to unpack.
The biggest thing is there was this notion that the Browns were going to sort of hard ass the Titans over this thing. Like, I couldn't imagine a worse move. And this has happened in the NFL before, where a team has sort of held a coach hostage who wanted to leave. And I don't know if it was coach with a family member, but just wanted to leave. I think the Buccaneers did this a couple of years ago. I mean, it's a really bad idea to do that. I think it's certain. Look, Bill Callahan is one of the best in the world. There's no getting over the fact that he is a genuine loss. But I think so long as the Browns continue to have this coaching staff in place, I think ultimately it's going to be good for them. You want to sell an environment where, you want people to advance in the field. Like the Browns cornerbacks coach, I think interviewed for the Titans defensive coordinator job, if I'm not mistaken. And if you've ever listened to him, one of the nicest, most the sweetest people on the planet. It's hilarious listening to his press conferences because he's just this hugely supportive guy. But anyway, you want people who want to be able to feel like they can come here and have the right experience in terms of being a coach, or what should extend to any field, really. And then, so letting Bill Callahan leave, I think, is ultimately going to tell other people who would potentially be looking at the Browns and go, it reinforces the idea that this is a good place to work. Like, people want to come
culturally
here.
Yes, exactly.
It's not like Bill Callahan's going, screw these guys, I want out of here. It's, as you said, it's a rare opportunity, although unfortunately not too rare, because the NFL is an obnoxiously nepotistic environment.
Yes, now we have two Harbaughs back in the NFL.
Well, you've got that. You've got Shula's grandkids getting jobs in coaches. So there's
Hey,
that
that's
part of
hey,
it.
I just want to say something out loud. That's everywhere, regardless of the company.
True. True. It's just the NFL has there's certain last names that just happen to work out. But the Alex Van Pelt thing, so I think the Nick Chubb injury really sort of reflecting on this sort of really hammered home. I think the Browns probably wish they would have done this last year. I think the Browns wish they would have moved on from Alex Van Pelt and Stump Mitchell a year ago. And that's not because they're bad people or bad coaches. It's just, I think watching the Deshaun Watson offense, we were sort of expecting a major change on offense. And I get the sense that some of the coaches they had in that building couldn't, that
Yeah.
they couldn't really adapt in that way. And that's not, again, and you look at this and I've seen like people, well, how can you fire a coach when you're, any assistant when you go 11-6 with 4 different quarterbacks and everything else? And it's an incredible achievement. But the running game was awful
Yes.
as soon as Nick Chubb went down, the running game died. And if Alex Van Pelt is not equipped or not comfortable, or let's put it this way, if there are any number of reasons to go a different direction with coaching staff. One, they're not good at their job. I don't think that was the case here. Two, they're not equipped to do something else. Like if the Browns are going to change their offense in certain ways, and those coaches really aren't equipped, or they don't believe in the changes that are being made. Like ultimately you have to make that change. And you look at like the end of the year where we got to Joe Flacco, it felt like this coaching staff is more comfortable with what Joe Flacco wanted to do, which is great. But Joe Flacco is not the starting quarterback. And whatever you want to say about Deshaun Watson, that's the guy. Like, and if the Browns coming into this, like, I think they wish they would have done this a year ago, simply because I think they wish they would have gotten people more equipped, more comfortable, better fits with Deshaun Watson than they had. And that's not to say that like, and the season played out the way it did. So like, I think in some ways it's a weird sort of situation that you like, I don't think in any way you look at this and go to a wasted year, because Deshaun Watson ultimately gets injured and it sort of doesn't matter. But like at the same time, you really don't want to do this again and then come back another year later and go, wow, we really should have done this. And well, we won 11 games. We stuck with everybody. I think the other part of this is like, I don't buy in the idea that this was Jimmy Haslam coming down and going, you have to fire people. I don't believe that at all. I think Kevin Stefanski is ruthlessly competitive in a way that we saw this last year. Like people were convinced that Joe Woods was let go because like people forced Kevin Stefanski to fire him, which you might have been able to believe until Mike Prefer was let go weeks later. The second Bubba Ventrone came available. I don't think anyone in the ownership was like, you have to do this. Clearly, Kevin Stefanski said, this is an opportunity for us to get better. I'm going to do this. And Kevin Stefanski has loyalty to these guys. I'm sure he likes the people he's let go. But ultimately, he's doing what's right for the team. And what's right for the team in this scenario is to hire guys that fit the direction they are going. And before we dig into like the nitty gritty of some of these coaches, the other part is that has resonated with me, and it is what we've seen in our own division, the AFC North. The Ravens got rid of their offensive coordinator last year, who was running what I would say was a fine offense, a pretty good offense. But the Ravens decided not good enough. Like, we can be better. So they go out and they get their new offensive coordinator, and the Ravens offense is much better. Although, man, did I enjoy watching them lose.
Yes.
And flying down to Alabama, I got to watch it again, and it was even better knowing what was going to come from Zay Flowers melting down the way.
Yes.
But anyway, Todd Monken was great for them. Like it took them to another level. And I think that's the Browns mindset. The Pittsburgh Steelers ultimately hired another offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, and I know there's some people going, ha ha ha, Arthur Smith. He cannot be worse than what they had. So, in the same way that just like your job, you are not just like content to stay still. You want to innovate to be ahead of the game. You want to stay ahead. I think that's the Browns mindset. Like they don't want to wait around to get stale. They want
Yeah,
to get to the next thing.
complacency, like is the worst possible thing that they could do right now. And honestly, I think it says a lot about the organization and how much they have grown that they are making these moves after having a really successful season and a winning season at that. Like even with all of the different quarterback changes, like regardless, they sat back and evaluated and said, we need to be better next year. As a fan, isn't that what you want from your organization? Like you don't want to be complacent. You don't want to just keep people around because, well, look at everything that we went through and we managed to get by and make the playoffs. No, the expectation is that you are in the playoffs and you are hosting the playoff game. You are hosting an AFC championship game. Like that is the expectation and the goal.
And that's what Andrew Berry said in his press conference. Like he used the Detroit Lions as the example. He said, "Look at the Detroit Lions. I want that. That needs to be us." The Jets game was such a special environment. We want to see that happen in the playoffs for the Browns. And unfortunately, you played in a division where, since the first time since 1935, I think it was, everybody finished with a winning record. You're not playing in the NFC South, where
Right.
somebody could limp into the division. Like they are looking to be the best. And to your point, I think that is the thing. Like I think in some ways, like the thing that people have been waiting for the Browns to do is also the reason they're pissed, or, asking questions, however you want to phrase it. Like the Browns are basically saying, the thing that jumps out to me is Tony Rizzo the day after the Super Bowl going, they have no sense of urgency. Literally nothing can happen the day after the Super Bowl. Nevertheless, he was out there saying they have no sense of urgency. Like this is the ultimate sense of urgency, that they are saying, we have all this now. We want to be very good right now. We believe we can win right now. So the pressure is on the guys they've hired to be good, but it's also them saying, like, we understand what we have here, and we don't want to just be like, we don't want to sit tight and waste it. And like, let's look at the Dallas Cowboys. Everybody thought, oh, Mike McCarthy's going to get fired because, Jerry Jones isn't going to be satisfied. They're going to go get Bill Belichick so they can win now. And like, certainly you can defend and say Mike McCarthy's won 12 games each of the last 3 years and be like, that's fine. And personally, that is my view. I think he's fine. But ultimately, like, everybody's saying the Cowboys are screwing up by not doing what the Browns are doing. So maybe it's a mistake, I guess. We'll see where it goes. But I think the mentality is what we want. I don't think we're going to come back and go, man, Alex Van Pelt was the Mike Hargrove of offensive coordinators, and the Browns really screwed up by firing him to just try to reach for something, or Marty Schottenheimer, where they fired him got rid of him too early. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think Alex Van Pelt, very likable guy. I think he certainly had added value to this team. I just think the direction they are going, I understand why the change and the reason they went with it.
Can I also bring up the fact that as fans, I see that a lot of them are very hung up on the offensive play caller, the actual person calling the plays. I find it so fascinating that this is a hang up in the fan base, that they don't think Kevin Stefanski should be calling plays. I mean, this was something that has been part of the narrative since Kevin started as the head coach. People have been clamoring for him to give up the play calls. So they wanted Alex Van Pelt to call plays for the last 3 years, right? That is what we heard. And so obviously, as soon as they're in the hunt for a new offensive coordinator, it's like, well, is he finally going to give up play calling? Andrew Berry in his press conference specifically said that is one of Kevin Stefanski's biggest strengths, is his play calling ability. And I agree. I don't understand how you can watch the games and think that he is bad at his job.
I would add,
I really don't understand.
I would add to that. Did you watch the playoffs? How many people? How many coaches are being second guessed for play calling in the playoffs? Todd Monken, again, he gets a ton of credit for what they did, but everybody's talking about the fact that they did not run the ball
They
at
did not run
all.
the ball. They completely walked away from their entire identity, which is wild.
The Detroit Lions offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, who turned down the Commander's job because he's making, I hear, an ungodly amount of money as an offensive coordinator.
Really?
He has very young children. Those are the reasons I was told that he's ultimately staying. But he got, what Browns fans love to say, too cute. With Jahmyr Gibbs and Montgomery as their two backs who were crushing it. They ran a 3rd and 4 handoff with Amon-Ra St. Brown, their receiver, in the backfield. Like that's and in the second half, it felt like they stopped running the ball after they crushed it. There are always play calls where people get mad at Kevin Stefanski or whatever, but by and large, he's very, very good. And we don't run into these issues other than people who just insist to run the ball even when it's going nowhere.
Yes.
But yes, to me, it's an incredibly collaborative process. The game planning, all that. Not only that, you have guys talking during the game to figure out what to do. Kevin Stefanski is doing other things during that time. And the question I never get an answer to is, what is it you want Kevin Stefanski to be doing that he's not, by calling plays? And I never get an answer to this. And I think what they want is what you see in movies where he's firing up he's yelling at guys on the sideline or whatever crap that like is very much not in Kevin Stefanski's character. Like it just, that's not who he is. Let's let him be what he's great at. Now, if he wants to give Ken Dorsey play calling, so be it. But like, because he's still going to be very involved in that process. And it may come to a situation where, Ken Dorsey's calling plays that, or is relaying the call that Kevin Stefanski's calling. Like, that's the part we never seem to acknowledge, is that there are undoubtedly times where Alex Van Pelt has called plays or suggested plays that get relayed into this. Like, you call a timeout, a critical point down by the red zone. Kevin Stefanski doesn't essentially take off his headset and go sit by himself to come up with a play. Like, he's talking to these people. I hate it. It's not a Browns-centric thing. I know the Bengals are going through it right now too with Zach Taylor, with their fan base. It's very strange. To answer your question about who their first choice was, all indications are it was Kellen Moore. And then Kellen Moore ultimately chose the Eagles, which is interesting. I've heard varying things on that. Some of it was his wife may have wanted to be in Philadelphia and closer to the East Coast. Certainly, it's a more metropolitan area than Cleveland. There's that aspect. There's no question he would be calling plays for them, I would assume. And ultimately, there's other factors that could come into that. Like, I don't look at this and go, that's a failing. Might the Browns come back and regret it? Maybe. But they got Dorsey, and my instinct is that Kevin Stefanski's going to retain play calling. But I don't really, again, my policy statement on this, I don't care. As long as plays get called well, the operation is clean. Great. Ken Dorsey's interesting because he obviously did have success with the Bills. What I've heard or what I've read, and Jake Burns has done a lot of work on this, is that that Ken Dorsey is sort of a better talking one-on-one than he is to a group. Ken Dorsey is better. He had never been sort of a CEO managing 20 people, which is essentially what the offensive coordinator job entails. Certainly, if he's here, Kevin can take on some of that, the sort of management aspect. And then there's some play calling ruts and things he gets into that, ultimately, I think Kevin Stefanski could be very, very good for Ken Dorsey in the same sense that I think Ken Dorsey could be good for Kevin Stefanski. My expectation is they're going to run a whole lot less zone. They're going to run a whole lot more gap. They're going to run more pullers. They're going to run more things like trap, those type of things, as opposed to running the wide zone. That was Stump Mitchell's, that was what Stump Mitchell did. That's part of the reason I don't think he's here anymore. One of many reasons, obviously. The fact that one of the ultimate signs of progress for this team and also weird is the fact that he had a whirlwind media tour on his way out of town. That I've never
that was
seen.
like the Hugh Jackson methodology, right?
And one of the things that Stump Mitchell said, and he was very complimentary of the Browns and a lot of other things, is one of the things that sort of cemented the fact that Stump needed to go in many ways was when he basically said players just want a system, or players just want to know what you want to do, and they'll figure it out. Like, which echoed Hugh Jackson to me, which is, I need players that fit my system. No, you don't. We don't have time for that. You have to fit to your players. You have to meet them where they're at and put them in the best position to succeed. And Stump Mitchell to me is basically saying the opposite. And that's troubling to me. Like, I want guys who are sitting there going, I want to figure out how to, we talked about this, Elijah Moore, for example. I want to figure out the best way to utilize him, which is clearly not on jet sweeps. I want to figure out the best way to use Jerome Ford and David Njoku and these other guys. I don't want to sit here and go, well, this is what we do, and we're going to find guys that fit our thing, because that takes forever. It's not realistic. You have to be able to adapt. And I think that's part of the reason they switched. And those things are important to me as somebody, it's very difficult to be like, this is a good hire, this is a bad hire. I don't have nearly enough information. Like, it's very fascinating to me that we've not learned, after people passionately argued how great of a hire Hugh Jackson was, how great of a hire Freddie Kitchens was, and how great of a hire Josh McDaniels would have been, and then not be able to sort of take a step back and go, I don't know. I like, here are things I can look at and say, this is good. I like this about this person, but ultimately I just really hope they got it right, because that's all we can really do.
Right. Again, we want to root for success of this team. And you brought it up at the beginning of the show, just about how the offense with Deshaun Watson at the beginning of the year, and again, we didn't get to see a lot of him because he got injured and was out so early. It didn't look great. It didn't look bad per se, but it just didn't look right. It didn't click. And we've talked about this a lot. This team, we just don't have the luxury to just wait around and hope that it gets better. Like, you can't plan your entire season and offense around hope. They had to take action. They are doing something about it. And honestly, I think this is exciting. I think it's exciting to have a change and to see what comes from it. I mean, I go back to it's just funny, Pete, because like the discourse around, everyone was a little bit surprised and or shocked about Deshaun going into this season, like thinking that, like, the rust is gone, right? Mm-hmm. You can't blame things on rust anymore. And then it was, well, this offense wasn't built for Deshaun Watson. Kevin Stefanski isn't the right guy for Deshaun Watson, the quarterback. And now it's like, okay, they go and do something about it because they're internalizing and recognizing things after a full season, and they do something about it. And now all of a sudden it's like, we're hopeless. We're screwed. Like, what is happening? The Browns are a disaster because they fired people after a really good season. It's just funny how the goalposts continue to move depending on what the Browns are doing or not doing.
There's always a search for the dysfunction. Where is it? I'm going to find it. It has to be there somewhere. So they, obviously one of the other hires they made was Tommy Rees as tight ends coach. That one I'm really excited about.
Were you surprised by that though? The tight ends moving on from I'm already blanking on who it was.
TC McCartney.
Yes, based on just David Njoku and his performance this year, or was that more of like that was just a David Njoku thing? Like we've been waiting for this.
I think a lot of it is David Njoku is just really, really talented, and it's just been a matter of him figuring it out. I don't know. Again, it's one of those. I don't know how good or not good TC McCartney was. He may have been great for what they were doing, and maybe he doesn't fit where they're going.
He would have been there for like Austin Hooper and stuff, right?
He was in a different job at that point.
Okay.
He's moved around a little bit.
The tight end room outside of this year has been pretty underwhelming. And that always came as a surprise to me, especially with Kevin Stefanski at the helm of the offense.
Yeah, a little bit. Tight end coach has sort of been the job you get before good things happen to you for the most part, because that Drew Petzing had that job, and then he got promoted to quarterbacks coach, and then he got the offensive coordinator job with the Arizona Cardinals. So yes,
So you're calling him a massive failure.
well, TC, what's
That's
interesting
really
is
bad for the confidence, Pete.
what TC McCartney is interesting. I believe he was a guy they brought in through the Bill Willis diversity outreach thing, and like have sort of developed him over a few years. Like, and it wasn't that they I mean, yes, they fired him, but it was the ultimate, they just did not pick up, they sort of just let his contract run out. I expect he will do well. And like, we'll see. I like with all these guys, I hope they do well. This is certainly not Hugh Jackson. And I know there are people who have an enormous amount of contempt for Joe Woods. I do not. But like Hugh Jackson's the last coach where I go, good. Like I dislike him for things he did to this team, and particularly DeShone Kizer. Like I don't have that for these other people. It didn't work out, or they're going in a different direction. Fine. They can go and be great somewhere else. I'm not going to be here. And I want them to, I want to salt the earth type thing. But with Tommy Rees, I like the hire. One, yes, he's a tight ends coach. Yes, he's going to coach tight ends. He's not here just to do those things. He is super young, which is a theme throughout this. Everybody's getting younger. And he was the offensive coordinator for Notre Dame. He was the offensive coordinator for Alabama. That part of it I really like. I like the fact that they're getting somebody who's been recently in the college ranks, because innovation tends to go from high school to college to the pros. And he's been there recently. Certainly built. Nick Saban is arguably, if not the greatest college coach ever, thought highly enough of him to make his offensive coordinator. I like the idea that he's coming in here, because Tommy Rees does not take this job if he's not able to sort of contribute, if he's not being able to sort of find a way to put his own stamp on this offense and try to modernize it. That part is exciting to me. The fact that he has had experience being the offensive coordinator, the fact that he has designed game plans and all of these things and called plays, those are really exciting, because there's a world theoretically, it may not, in a couple of years, I assume Tommy Rees is ultimately going to get hired out at some point, but like there's a world where theoretically he becomes the offensive coordinator and the play caller here. Like that could be the evolution of where this thing goes, which is obviously would be good. So that part of it is certainly interesting to me, and I like that approach. Deuce Staley is fascinating to me, because if you watched Hard Knocks for the Detroit Lions, one of the most intense people ever, entertainingly intense if you're from the outside. I did talk to some people down at the Senior Bowl who cover the Lions, and their sort of thought process was you will either love him or you will dislike him, because he is literally like that all the time. Now, personally, I cannot wait for training camp to see clips of him and Jim Schwartz going at it, because I expect he will be a pain in Jim Schwartz's ass all training camp long, because Jim Schwartz is a competitive guy.
I welcome this. Like, I can't wait for this, because we already have like an offensive staff that is like very even keeled. They kind of they mirror Kevin Stefanski in a way. So you have Jim Schwartz on the opposite end, which everyone welcomed, that personality and that competitiveness, that just that, I don't know, more extreme personality. So I love this. I love that he has someone to kind of go against, and we have someone on the offensive side that can bring that type of mentality and mindset. I think this is great.
Yes. Like in general, defensively is where you really need the energy, because look, you are literally playing you are playing to try not to lose.
Right.
Like that is your job, is literally you are losing, and you are trying as best as you can to mitigate losing the whole time. So you need people to basically try to energize you as much as possible. And there's certainly an argument that the offensive line is the same way, but like offensively, you can typically have sort of lower key guys because it's more about execution. And guys on offense typically are already motivated because they're going to get the ball. And there's that natural sort of reward in it. But I do like the fact that Deuce Staley can be sort of a foil for the type of coaches that they've had on that side of the ball. I do like the fact that they've got a guy who's going to be fiery and bring that energy level. I think there's certainly a place for that. I think there's certainly a place for the training camp competition to be heated up between coaches and get it going that way. I think that can be beneficial. It can also go too far, certainly. But I like the idea of that. And again, Deuce Staley, 48 years old, 16 years younger than Stump Mitchell. And with all these guys, which I think has been important, certainly can be valuable. There's certainly ways it can hurt you, is that all of them have greater aspirations than the job they have right now. It can be negative in that you can potentially enter a world where you're out for yourself at the expense of other people, but it can also potentially bring out the best in you and get you to be more motivated to add more. Certainly Tommy Rees, whether it's college or pros, I think wants to be at the very least an offensive coordinator, if not a head coach. I assume that Ken Dorsey wants to aspire to be something of a full-time offensive coordinator and play caller or whatever. Maybe he wants to be a head coach. I'm not sure with him. Deuce Staley absolutely wants to be a head coach. He's been an assistant head coach for 3 different teams. And I think part of the reason he's here is because the Browns offer stability. He was just in a mess of a situation with Carolina. He went there. He left the Lions to go there because he wanted to be closer to home. He had a mother who was dealing with illness, and he always promised himself that if it had an opportunity to go home, he would go home. So that's all fine. He also gets to come to a situation where the Browns had a really bad running game. So if he's able to turn it around and have a very successful running game, that will only help him in terms of trying to get where he wants to go, which is to be a head coach. I think that could be very good for this team, that they have a lot of guys who are that. That's not to say it was bad with guys like Bill Callahan and Alex Van Pelt and Jim Schwartz. In some ways, it's in this mode where like there is no higher, there's nobody's calling them for head coaching jobs
Right.
at this point. It's not bad, but like there is something to be said for getting a little bit extra because you aspire to be to greater things.
Yeah, I agree with that. It could mutually benefit both parties. When you have someone who wants to succeed, to be able to get promoted and move on into a greater position, and then that should benefit the team that they're working for ultimately at the end of the day. I mean, I think about that a lot, though. When you look around the league, it's a very ancestral league just in general. People that get fired or don't have contracts extended tend to land somewhere else in the NFL on a different team. But I always think about the fact that, this Brown staff, Kevin Stefanski's staff, has been intact now for, going on 4 years. And it's not like anyone has been clamoring to pluck people from Kevin's staff. Right. And I think that does say a lot. You have other teams that maybe even haven't had the same success that the Browns have had this year, that we're getting a lot of interest in people wanting their guys. And again, probably a reason to reevaluate and make some changes in this organization.
No, it's possible that they are very good at what they are, and that's the perfect role for them. There's absolutely that possibility. But to your point, I think Chad O'Shea interviewed for offensive coordinator last year with a couple teams, has not gotten any looks this year. Brandon Lynch, the corners coach, interviewed for a defensive coordinator job, but that's basically been it for the Browns in terms of people looking to move up. All of the people who are sort of on that career path, so to speak,
right,
are in the front office. It's
yes.
how
that is where the Browns get the recognition and where people want to hire from is the front office.
Yeah, and it's like it's a question of how long is it going to be until they are hired out, which. So look, there's certainly always the possibility for brain drain. That's certainly a factor, but it's also, and we've talked about this before. It's one of those things where if people are getting hired out of here, it makes other people want to work here because they see what that allows to happen, and you should at least theoretically get a better pool of candidates to hire from. More people are excited to come here. And I think certainly the stability aspect is a huge factor in that. Like the fact that Kevin Stefanski is going to be entering year 5, it feels like he's going to be here for a while. Feels like Andrew Berry's going to be here for a while. I think that was a huge selling point for Deuce Staley coming here as opposed to the Jets, where you're sitting here going, the Jets head coach could be fired next week because of how insane that organization is.
Right.
Like it naturally turns people off. And that is something that the Browns have dealt with for years, where both from players and coaches and front office personnel, they're basically like, do I really want to go to Cleveland? I'm probably going to have to get ready to move again. And you know, in as much as this is a sort of a nomadic league, you want to be able to put roots down. You want to be able to have some sort of semblance of normal, especially if you've got a family, especially if you've got kids. You know, you get into the whole thing of, you know, I don't want to have to pick up and uproot my kids out of their school. They've got friends and all that stuff. Like that is an attractive option for that. And the other part about this, and I know this has come up a lot, but like the longest tenured offensive coordinator in the NFL right now is Ben Johnson. He was hired in 2022. Nobody's sitting on their hands with this. Like Alex Van Pelt would be a fossil in that sense, in the fact that he was entering his 5th year with the same team. It's crazy that that's what it is. And there, on some level, you can argue that is a madness that's going on in the NFL, that it is so ridiculous that nobody's willing to let sort of people figure it out. But like, it is a reality and nobody wants to sit still. Everybody's always trying to modernize, always trying to innovate, and always trying to make that next move.
Yeah, agreed, as they should.
Yeah. So obviously the biggest thing now is waiting for the offensive line thing. The natural option would be go Scott Peters. He's been Bill Callahan's assistant offensive line coach for years. He's 45, which is fascinating. He's had opportunities to leave. That has absolutely been a thing for him. There are people who swear by him. Obviously, the players know him, like him, all that stuff. It'll be interesting to see if they want to entertain outside options. They had obviously talked to a offensive line coach from the Seattle Seahawks as an offensive coordinator interview. I suspect in the same way Deuce Staley was under the auspices of an offensive coordinator interview, there was also an element of,
yes,
this could also be for this job. It's probably reasonable to think that was the case with the Seahawks guy. I think it's reasonable for them to talk to other people, even if it's just to make you feel better about hiring the guy in your building.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I mean, I had texted you when you were telling me about possibly who they could backfill him with. And I was just saying, you know, because they've made some outside moves, I would be okay if they looked outside as well for this specific position. You know, the offensive line, I like Bill Callahan a lot. I really did. I know he's one of the best in the business. I feel like the offensive line, again, a ton of injuries just throughout the entire season. I worry about what the future looks like at that position group specifically. You had Jed Wills, who is a little bit of, is it motivation? Is it skill? Is it a combination of both? Who was working under one of the best coaches in the NFL, who still couldn't quite get over the hump. And then I'm like, okay, well, are you thinking about this hire as, this is the left tackle? You're not going to go find an elite left tackle off the streets or probably on the trade market. Like
they certainly tried.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. Yes, it's very true. Didn't come to fruition. And so I'm thinking about like all of these different nuances where you have really solid guards. You have like, you feel good about like some of the pieces that you have. You know, what's going to happen with Jack Conklin, you know, coming again off of a really brutal injury. The Jed Wills piece that I already mentioned. I don't know, Pete, like this is a place where is it enough just to promote from within, knowing that he was there this whole time and the offensive line, in my opinion, was a challenge this year. And I get it. There were a ton of injuries, but you saw how the other position groups were able to elevate regardless of injuries.
So there's a lot of talk this offseason about what's the most important thing to address in terms of like talent, and wide receiver gets brought up a lot. And I think wide receiver is certainly a thing they're going to keep.
Yeah, it's been something we've talked about for years.
But to me, it's the future of the offensive line. Like, and I plan to write about this extensively for all the reasons you just mentioned. I don't think Jack Conklin's going anywhere. The money's weird. Like it would basically cost as much to get rid of him as it would to keep him. And he's a good player. Like he's good. He's still the best tackle on this team. It's not even close. Like I know people are like, no, DeJuan Jones is better. No, he's not. He's really not. Like DeJuan Jones is really, really impressive as a rookie. Jack Conklin was an all-pro multiple times. Like Jack Conklin is very good. Now, obviously the health is a big question. Like he keeps getting hurt. And with the knees, and again, it's the flukiest injury. The dude just collapsed into his knee, and all these people like injury prone. It's like, I don't know how many people are going to sustain. Like, that's just awful luck. But even so, even if he comes back and plays well again this year, you are always going to be sitting there going, well, what if he gets hurt again? Jedrick Wills was fine as a guy making $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, $6 million, I think this past year. He is not fine making $15 million. And they have a very expensive offensive line in general. Joe Bitonio, everybody is nobody is on a rookie contract right now. They're all on very, very lucrative deals. So something you have to be looking at this is in terms of not only are they good enough, but you've got to be like realistic about cost. If the Browns obviously are trying to look at this as we want as many bites of the apple every year. And this is the perfect example. This past year was the perfect example of why all in is stupid. Granted, there are times where you may be pushed into that where you have to be all in, but like had they done that, it would have been an absolute waste this past year, just for reasons that had nothing to do with what they were trying to do. It had everything to do with injuries and just randomness and horrible luck. In the same way that happened to the Jets, and they're going to pay for it. So part of this is we have, Bill Callahan, it would have been nice to have him here another 20 years, but he is 67 years old. Like if he's going to go, there was a belief that this was going to be his last job. I don't know how long he plans on coaching with his kid. And if Brian Callahan gets fired in 2 years, that may be it for Bill Callahan. He just may retire. He may do it after 1 year. I don't know. So this was always a thing the Browns knew was coming. So whether they promote Scott Peters or whether they hire somebody else, they knew this was coming. But either way, whoever they hire, in addition to the fact that they've got to sort of address particularly tackle, even if DeJuan Jones is starting next year, as I mentioned, Jack Conklin is a reason you need to start thinking ahead. But the other part of that is guard. Yes, Joe Bitonio is great. I think he's going to end up in the Hall of Fame. I will pound the table for him on that. Wyatt Teller is a good guard. They are both under contract through 2025. And at this point, Joe Bitonio is year to year. He says he's coming back next year. I have no reason to not believe him, but that may change in another year. He played through a ton of injuries this past year, and you may get into that situation where you may get that article like Travis Kelce, where you start hearing about, man, I'm playing through this, or like Joe Thomas was. And at that point, then he retires. But even if he doesn't, even if he plays the whole 2 years, Michael Dunn is your only backup. And he's not a starter in waiting. He is fine. He seems to have a weird power where he can play all world for one game and then misses the next 4 with a calf injury. He's done this multiple times. It's unbelievable. And it would not surprise me if the Browns re-sign Michael Dunn again. But there is nobody in there where you're going, I've got this guy. ready. We're developing this guy behind. It's different with tackle. Like at least DeJuan Jones was there, even though James Hudson is, I think, conclusively proven he's not the future. He was at least a guy you had in there that you were sort of like, we've got this young guy, we're working with him, we want to see what he can become. That guy does not exist at guard. They've had Drew Forbes, they've had all these other guys and battling injuries, and they just have not been able to do that. So I think this, like through the draft, because again, it's through cost, but maybe they'll get some cheap free agents. Maybe there's another Ethan Pothick out there that's going to sign for the league minimum and become a practical Pro Bowler again. That would be really helpful. I would love that. But they've got to be like proactive in terms of thinking ahead. Now, this is a great deal for the Browns, that the fact we are now thinking about drafting in 2024 for 2025 and 26, as opposed to we've got to draft this, and this because they have to be good now or we're in a world of hurt. Like that's certainly the way we wanted to go. But I do think this is a big deal. And then so whoever you hire as the offensive line coach or whoever becomes that guy, that's their stamp. Now you are obviously fitting it to the offense that they're going to play. Now that may, it may be the same people. I don't know. It may be different people. You may want some different things. There are certainly different things I would look for, but I'm not in the building yet. But ultimately the offensive line coach is going to have an input on, who he thinks should be on the board, who he thinks is a good fit, all those things. So like, there's that aspect. It would have been great to have Bill Callahan here for 2 years and to like get these guys ready to go and sort of leave them on great footing. But I do think this is to put it in your terminology, an opportunity to like pick this guy you really like for the offensive line. It's a hugely important position. It's a hugely important coach. Bill Callahan was making like $3 million a year here. To then say, we're going to set this up. We've got our guy. We're going to start putting it in his image and get these young guys that fit where the offense is going. Like all of this happening at the same time could be very good for the Browns. Obviously, it's a lot of pressure as well.
Yeah, a ton of pressure, but again, like you have a really good base to start with. So, the talent is certainly there for the most part. There's things that need to be massaged, and you would hope with, the running game needing to be fixed, corrected, the coaching change there, that, those two things are going to be very close to being intertwined, working together to be able to fix a lot of the issues that this team had after losing Nick Chubb. And again, like the other thing that we haven't touched on that I know we'll get into it in later episodes is we still don't even know, the Nick Chubb that's going to be back and what that's going to look like. You would assume that running back group 2 is also young. One would think they're going to draft someone at the running back position.
Certainly possible.
Yeah. So I just feel like there's, this offense, as much as we want to say like you're not losing a lot of pieces, that is true. But I think there are position groups that I think are going to look very different. And with a new scheme, do you have the right players? If you don't have the right players, you got to figure out the scheme for the players that you do have. But yeah, I think the more that I think about it, this offense and all of these different position groups and skill groups, like I think it's going to look a lot different. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, I know that the offense was very efficient, but I don't think it's a bad thing.
Well, I mean, the big argument is look how much better the Browns got when they made the changes on both defense and special teams.
Right.
The
clear upgrade.
That Kevin Stefanski has enough credibility to get these people in the building says a lot about where this team was going, because obviously we talked about not being the first choice. Kevin Stefanski wasn't the first choice.
True.
Freddie Kitchens was. So like there is this element of, you don't really know until it happens, but obviously I feel good about Kevin Stefanski being the one making these choices, or, obviously in concert with, he gets input from guys like Andrew Berry, but it's his staff. He's going to make those calls. To your point, the Browns do not have a timetable on Nick Chubb. They're not saying Nick Chubb is going to be back by X, as opposed to Deshaun Watson, where they're saying they feel pretty good that he's going to be ready by the spring. I do expect Nick Chubb will play, but I am super conservative on this. Like my thought process might be he suits up for the last couple games of the regular season and and this is all assuming the Browns are good, that he just plays the last couple games and just goes right to the playoffs. And they're just like, hey, here's this guy.
Wouldn't that be a miracle if we like were able to
He's gonna
get
hit
to
the
the
ground
playoff?
running and be crushing it. I think if the Browns are like we hope they are, they allow Nick Chubb to take as much time as possible to be close to being Nick Chubb, as opposed to, hey, he's healthy enough, and we get sort of a compromised version where he's not, he's not that guy. And we're sitting here sort of like almost angry at him because he's not the guy we want him to be, uh, after going through this ridiculously horrific injury. Like, there's a part of me that wants them to be super conservative at the earliest. To me, and we'll see, Nick Chubb has ridiculous healing powers. He's ahead of schedule, or on schedule. He thinks he's ahead of schedule. But like the second half of the year at earliest, and I there's a part of me that doesn't want him to come back any earlier than that, just because make sure he's Nick Chubb before you put him back out there. But to your point, yes, they got to get more running backs, and if Deuce Staley's here, Deuce Staley's probably going to have some input on that, and what's a fit for him, what's a fit for this offense. Like, there's a lot of this opportunity to sort of find pieces that make sense for where the Browns are going, make sense for what they're doing. And then like the Ken Dorsey part that we didn't get into. Ken Dorsey's background is interesting, and I think it's not lost on me that Tommy Rees just coached an offense that had a quarterback who is a very physical quarterback, wins with his legs, dual threat, who's a Jalen Milroe is a very like a growing process over the course of the season. But that's the experience he has. He has experience with a quarterback who plays like that. Ken Dorsey's background, he was with Cam Newton in Carolina, and I have zero doubt that Cam Newton and Deshaun Watson, who are very close, have talked about this. In fact, Cam Newton said on the podcast with Deshaun Watson and Quincy Avery, like basically said that the only reason Deshaun Watson wasn't in Carolina is because the Panthers did not talk to him, which is which is fascinating to me, because Cam Newton is basically saying, unafraid of any baggage that Deshaun Watson has, like, you guys are stupid because you didn't listen to me and didn't get Deshaun Watson. That just on its own. But have no doubt they've talked about Ken Dorsey. Cam Newton really liked Ken Dorsey. Ken Dorsey was there when Cam Newton was MVP of the league and went to the Super Bowl. And then Ken Dorsey ends up in Buffalo after a 1-year stint as the assistant athletic director at Florida International University, because why not? To then be with the Buffalo Bills and the development of Josh Allen. And my understanding is that, and I think Josh has said this, but Josh Allen was a big proponent of Ken Dorsey, like really liked him, liked him for that offensive coordinator job in some ways, like when Brian Daboll left, because he had such a good relationship with him. But what's the theme here? Big, strong quarterbacks who can create with their legs and throw. Like guys that fit just like Deshaun Watson. And obviously, I don't want Deshaun Watson playing like Josh Allen. I don't want him trying to run people over. Like I'm good. I've seen that. It did not work out too well, and I'm hoping they're a little more conscious. But I do think understanding how to coach that type of quarterback is critical, and certainly not lost on me that is the guy they hired after Alex Van Pelt. Clear experience with this guy, with this type of player. And again, Tommy Rees with that kind of player. I think those things are super valuable in terms of understanding and committing to saying that we are going to do everything in our power to make Deshaun Watson successful, because they have to. If they don't get it right, that is a massive problem for this team. So if Ken Dorsey does nothing else but Deshaun Watson is Deshaun Watson, it will be a great hire. It almost doesn't matter what else he does.
He's also the quarterback's coach, right?
Unclear.
I thought that I saw somewhere that it would be offensive coordinator, quarterback's coach. Yeah, I'm with you. I think it was probably said like Deshaun Watson has got to look the best in this offense. Like you have to. The investment that this team has made in the quarterback is critical. And you said it before on the podcast, like this team is playing in a division where it's competitive. You have Joe Burrow in the division. You have Lamar Jackson in the division. The Steelers, whatever, but they always hang around. You got to give the Steelers.
Can I just say how much I love
for that?
That I love that is how the Steelers are being referred to. I enjoy this so much. You know, I have no idea how happy I am that we're back to the Bubby Brister style Steelers, where they don't know who the quarterback's going to be.
Yeah, but listen, they figure it out though. They
True,
are there.
They win.
They win. So you can't discredit them or discount them from this division. And so if you truly want to host a playoff game, the eyes are on winning the division. That's not going to be an easy task. Winning the division is not going to be an easy task. The way to win the division is to have a really good defense, which they had, but you have to have the dominant elite quarterback play.
Well, let's talk about that real quick for a second. You watch the playoff games, I imagine, right?
Yep.
What do you think the theme was of the teams who got to the conference championship and ultimately the teams that are in the Super Bowl? What are the things that stuck out to you about those teams?
Well, I mean, defense specifically.
Sure.
I would say, well, listen, I'm going to speak to just the Kansas City Chiefs for a minute. I feel like you can't count Patrick Mahomes out. Like Patrick Mahomes,
he's great, the greatest.
Travis Kelce, like lights out performance. And then the coaching, like Kyle Shanahan, Andy Reid, like have that ability to get their teams ready, to play disciplined, and have everything firing on all cylinders when it matters the most.
So the thing I would add to that, line of scrimmage and being able to run the ball when you had to.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Because watching both
Pete, I had a hard time answering that because I find myself very confused about Brock Purdy. I don't know how to feel about Brock Purdy specifically.
Look, he's inconsistent, but
yeah, I think that's like why I'm like,
he was genuinely incredible in the second half of that game against the Lions. Like he
also has Christian McCaffrey, like to your point, like the run game, and the Kansas City Chiefs, like they brought back their run game in a meaningful way.
Isaiah Pacheco was great. He's
fun to watch. He's real fun to watch.
Yes, he just runs. He runs like Kareem Hunt did when he was healthier.
Yeah. He does remind me of that.
By the way, I have criticized Kareem Hunt any number of times. I don't know how on earth a person can walk with a ruptured abductor.
I know.
Let alone play football with that. Like that's incredible to me. As somebody who's strained their abductor and could barely walk for like a couple weeks, like that blows my mind. I don't know what that involves, but that's incredible. And he actually, as I said, at the end of the year, it seemed like he gave up some of his life force to get a little extra juice to run a little bit. But anyway, Isaiah Pacheco and the Chiefs carried them through the Bills game. They were still consistent in beating the Ravens. It's not like they were a dominant running game, but when they had to run the ball, they ran the ball.
Right.
The Lions had an outstanding offensive line, and Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery and those guys, when they ran the ball well, they controlled that football game. When they got away from it, they sort of got themselves in trouble. The Ravens had were great in other games, and all of a sudden, the Chiefs made them. Well, I don't even know if the Chiefs made them, but they became one-dimensional, and Lamar Jackson had to try to win it by himself. And obviously there were other factors. Zay Flowers just having the meltdown of all meltdowns over the course of a couple of plays, but like they got away from who they are. So you look at this and I look, that's why, as I said, I think offensive line is like a hugely important part of this offseason. I think getting the running game going is a hugely important part of the offseason because yes, you need to have a good quarterback. You need to have good quarterback play, but even when you have good quarterback play, it's not enough if you're going to be one-dimensional because defenses are so good. So that to me is a huge deal. That to me is something that becomes a massive priority. And part of the reason I think the Browns made some of the changes they did. I think that becomes their whole focus. So, and in addition to just Deshaun Watson is priority number one, clearly. But just to me, that becomes a big deal. And I think that's their path to getting where they want to go. getting the division. They've obviously been incredible at home. So if they can host home games in the playoffs, it's going to make them so much better in that regard. So there's just a lot that I think becomes, an opportunity for them to get so much better. And a team that won 11 games last year. I fully believe the Browns could be a better team next year and win less games just by virtue, because I think the schedule is going to get much more difficult. But yeah, that's sort of where we're at.
Listen, I'm excited. I like it. I like where they're going.
Excited in February. Wow. We are early.
Talk to me. Yeah, talk to me when we're like in the depths of mock drafts, and I'll be back to my not excited.
All right. So look, there's plenty of offseason to go in terms of what we've got here. The Browns obviously have to get their offensive line coach. They have to determine if they want to hire a quarterbacks coach specifically, or if Ken Dorsey's going to just do that job. And they've got to announce their staff. We're recording this on a Saturday. Ken Dorsey is going to have his first press conference Monday, which should be interesting. And then obviously next week's going to be the Super Bowl, which there's so many things I enjoy about this element. There a certain group of people who have completely lost their minds are now rooting, who would never root for the 49ers in any other capacity because of where they play, who are now forced into that camp. It's great. But
can I just say one thing about the whole, first of all, we could have an entire podcast just solely dedicated to Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, the whole phenomenon that has happened, which I don't know if you saw the tweets and the numbers, but her brand worth to the Chiefs specifically, did you see that number?
No.
$335 million in terms of what she has brought to the Chiefs.
Yeah. Well, it's
insane.
Whether you are happy to see her or not happy to see her, and you're complaining about it, you're paying attention. Like, she is obviously a huge draw, and the numbers speak for themselves. By the way, just to quickly mention, we had talked about this on a previous podcast. The Christian Juszczyk,
yes,
designing the jackets based off of jerseys and stuff.
Yeah, she got the NFL licensing green light, which
is pretty good. So hopefully that goes to a good place, because obviously you were excited about that, particularly given what you do. But like, hopefully,
I believe I tweeted about this, how there was a huge white space in a market for cute women's NFL gear. And maybe this is me manifesting something that came to life. Although it can't just be like WAG prices. She's got to do something for the mass market. Not everyone wants a puffer jacket with a number on it, you know?
No, you're right. That's going to ultimately be the challenging part.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
I would just say it's cool that she was able to create this thing, got a ton of support for her husband, and it has manifested itself into something. Whether
Taylor Swift phenomenon, I'm telling you.
Yes, whether that is good or bad remains to be seen. But I'm at least excited about the prospect of seeing this work out, because obviously we have to do better than just throw pink at them. And
glitter and racerback tank tops, what every woman wants.
Yes. Anyway, we'll be back hopefully next week. I don't see any reason not to be, but who knows? Talking more off season. There's plenty to discuss with this. Obviously, the coaching staff stuff is going to be a theme, and then this will go fast. I promise, because we'll be back next in March is already free agency and stuff, so player movement's already be going. There's a lot to see with that. So anyway, help us out, like, subscribe, share, tell a friend, all that good stuff. And hopefully we will be a little more consistent with our schedule to help out. But yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see what happens with the rest of the offseason.